We would like to take another moment to thank our sponsors, whose financial support helps make CapTime's Idea Fest the important event that it is. Special thanks to our presenting sponsor, UBS, the Burrish Group. They have been a major sponsor since the very first Idea Fest. Major sponsors include HealthX Ventures, Exact Sciences, and Quartz. Co-sponsors are Madison Gas and Electric, Godfrey & Kahn Law, the University of Wisconsin-Madison, and Epic. Our Friends of Idea Fest sponsors are Wisconsin Alumni Research Foundation, Madison Community Foundation, University Research Park, Cargo Coffee, Doc Smokehouse, and Forward Theater Company. Our media partners are the Wisconsin State Journal, Madison.com, WKOW Channel 27, and Hinckley Productions. Again, we thank you for your support and for making Idea Fest 2021 a huge success.
In July 2011, I wrote a column that had this headline, "Tammy Baldwin likely to forego safety for her dream of a U.S. Senate seat." She and I had met to catch up at Ground Zero Coffee Shop on Williamson Street, and I was stunned when she said she wasn't just thinking about, but committed to giving up the safety of her House seat to run for the U.S. Senate seat vacancy being created the next year by the retirement of Herb Kohl. You have to remember, this was a time when the Tea Party was ascendant. Republicans of the Scott Walker Act 10 era dominated state politics. It felt at a minimum like an uphill climb. Of course, history proved how little I knew. She beat Tommy Thompson in 2012, something Democrats like Tony Earl, Tom Loftus, and Ed Garvey had failed to do, then was reelected in 2018 by a nearly 11% margin in a state, as we all know, now closely divided, bitterly hyper-partisan, with razor-thin election margins in most instances. Her reputation as an important voice on many issues has continued to grow in today's closely divided U.S. Senate. Senator Baldwin is here today, and we'll talk with Jesse Opoyan, the CapTime's outstanding political reporter and Capitol Bureau Chief, on the infrastructure bill, voting rights, and many other topics. Again, we have index cards for questions, and without further ado, please welcome Senator Baldwin and Jesse to our stage.
I think our mics are good. Good? Yeah.
Excellent.
All right. Thanks for being here, Senator Baldwin.
I'm delighted to.
And thank you all for being here. Those of you who were in our first sessions, thank you for making it through the fire alarm and whatever odd things happened with that. That was a fun surprise. But Senator, we're just in kind of a big swing through the state, kind of hitting all corners of it. Kind of wondering if you could talk to us a little bit about what you were talking about on those visits, but sort of wondering if you could talk about sort of the connection between Washington and Wisconsin for those who feel like, yeah, what they do doesn't really affect us.
Wow. Well, my recent swing through the state, we have a traditional August recess, and it affords the opportunity really to get out and about, and an opportunity that we really didn't have last year because of being in the height of the pandemic. So it was a great opportunity, and I did focus a lot on how the work that we have done or are doing in Washington would impact the state, whether it's the American Rescue Plan, which was passed very early on in the Biden administration and was that sort of let's get the pandemic in the rearview mirror. Well, Delta kind of put a bump on that in that road, but nonetheless, shots into arms and assistance to small businesses and recognizing the frontline role that state and local government and schools have played in countering the pandemic. And so we talked about that, the child tax credit, and help to those who have been displaced from work through the pandemic. But we also talked a lot about both the bipartisan infrastructure plan that passed the Senate and the Build Back Better budget that we are negotiating and working on right now. Because in my mind, they both go hand in glove. We have neglected our infrastructure in the state, whether we think of it in terms of roads and bridges that are substandard, or the failure to connect everyone to high-speed broadband, which we saw the consequences of during the pandemic, or the failure in all parts of the state to get rid of lead laterals that provide drinking water to our families, and particularly vulnerable children. And we also, in neglecting this infrastructure, have not addressed resiliency in a time of extreme weather events and climate change. So I'm talking about the substance of what we're working on, but there's something to be said about going and seeing. So visiting farms that are both impacted by extreme flooding and those that are practicing methods on the farm of preventing erosion, talking about how we can promote and make it cost-effective for farmers to do the right thing. And that's just one example. I met with timber professionals to hear how things were going in the North Woods, and they're struggling too. Stopped by some shuttered venues. It's strange to be in a big theater. I've spent many an hour in this theater before. For anyone who doesn't know, I was raised by my grandparents, and my grandmother was the head costume designer at the University of Wisconsin when I was a toddler, here through about here. And the costume lab used to be below this stage, I think. So I spent many an hour. But anyways, in my travels around the state, visiting live performance venues that were the first to have to close and will be some of the last to open, and talking about how vital the live venue operator grant has been for many, the difference between being permanently shuttered, and how many small businesses, business people I met with who said, I was within hours of failing to meet payroll when the PPP loans came through. So lots of examples of how what we did early has helped, and how what we're working on now would make a critical difference to our quality of life and economy in the state.
And you're working right now, the Senate is working through the reconciliation bill, which is at 3.5 trillion, it sounds like, but Joe Manchin's not so into that. So who knows where that'll end up. But what are your priorities that you want to really make sure are in that package?
Well, I have multiple priorities, but let me explain sort of the philosophy I have about how this blends with the bipartisan infrastructure bill. So we were pleased to be able to put together something that was truly bipartisan and passed the Senate last month by a strong vote. But if you think about the goals of universal broadband access or getting rid of all lead laterals in the state in the next 8 to 10 years, it has to go hand in hand with a bill that supports the workforce to do that. We don't have the workforce today. For example, just take one slice of that. 70,000 lead laterals in Milwaukee. Right now they're removing about 1,000 per year. So do the math. That would be 70 years before we get rid of all the lead laterals without a change of pace. But if we change that pace, we're going to need a lot more pipe fitters and plumbers. And frankly, there's a lot of folks who would love to get the training and apprenticeships, et cetera, involved in doing that. The Build Back Better budget is sort of the hand in the glove that gets us there, because it lowers taxes for working families through the child tax credit and earned income tax credit. We're extending those. And it has a focus on reducing childcare costs and healthcare costs and all the things that working families struggle with in order to get ahead. It creates an opportunity for tuition-free technical or community college after high school for 2 years, so that we do have access to the type of training we need for the workforce that will be truly engaged in that infrastructure building. And the clean energy jobs that will be created in both the infrastructure bill and the Build Back Better bill. So I am really excited about the opportunities. Kind of interesting that everyone's focused on the price tag because of a few people. You know, first of all, we're committed to asking and demanding that the wealthy pay their fair share, that corporations pay their fair share of taxes, and that will provide the revenue necessary for these. But I'm interested always in talking about, you know, what these efforts will cost rather than talking about the efforts, and do we have a commitment to do it?
And before we go on, I think you'll see there's some volunteers walking around in bright green shirts. Can't miss them. They've got some note cards. If you've got questions you'd like to submit to us, you can write those down. And ask if you guys could kind of just bring them up sort of sporadically throughout, that would be great. So you've worked under 3 administrations now in the Senate. You've been there. Drastically different experiences, I would imagine. How has that experience changed from administration to administration? Is it getting a little bit more done now?
Without question. I mean, we're facing in this last year and a half the greatest public health and economic threat that we've faced in a long, long time. And the Trump administration not only did not stand up to the occasion, but in many ways, the Trump administration was frustrating local efforts to fight this pandemic and focus on economic recovery due to the pandemic. Same here in the state, you know, with a change of administrations, the Republicans in the state legislature were fighting Governor Evers at every step when he's following the science and I think putting forth prudent policies. And so it was a very clear example for all of us of who's stepping up and who's not. Joe Biden stepping up, American Rescue Plan, followed by the infrastructure plan and the Build Back Better budget. I'm so grateful for Governor Evers' leadership. He stood up, and I'm standing up, and it is frustrating to see the fact that we were not all during a period of crisis working in the same direction in the previous administration, but I feel like we're recovering some of that footing now.
How much of a difference does it make for you and your ability to do your job in Washington based on what kind of elected officials we have here at the state level?
A lot of difference. I'll give you one example in terms of priorities I have in the Build Back Better budget, is closing the Medicaid coverage gap here in the state. We have a state legislature that has refused Governor Evers' endeavors to do what the vast majority of all other states, whether under Republican or Democratic leadership, have done, which is take full advantage of Medicaid expansion for especially those who are working poor. And that coverage gap has real life consequences. I introduced the Medicaid Saves Lives Act with my two new colleagues from Georgia, Senators Warnock and Ossoff, because Georgia is another state with a Medicaid gap. And it just makes no sense to me that somebody who makes $14,000 a year is not eligible for Medicaid and has enormous out-of-pocket expenses for their health care if they have it at all, but usually they don't. During a pandemic of all things, and our state legislature still refused to expand it. So we are trying to close that gap, and it makes a world of difference whether you have a cooperative state government or not.
Sure. The last time I saw you in Madison, you were here with Senator Klobuchar talking about voting rights, which is another issue that really spans the state to federal area. Where does that legislation, all of it, there's several proposals have been introduced. Where does all of that stand? What are you hopeful can actually be accomplished in the Senate?
I remain hopeful about our ability to ultimately pass strong voter protections. We should be making it easier for people to vote, not harder. Again, thanks to the leadership of Governor Evers, he's used his veto pen to thwart Republican legislative attempts to do this type of thing here in Wisconsin that we've seen elsewhere. But frankly, as I've explained to my colleagues, a lot of the damage here in the state was done over a decade ago under the previous gubernatorial administration, making it harder for people to vote and obviously having a very gerrymandered map that we've been contending with. And so I remain hopeful because we have 49 Democrats out of the 50 sponsored the For the People Act. We worked with that remaining Democrat, Joe Manchin, who wouldn't initially sign on, to look at what his objections were. And he actually had some, I think, strong recommendations to make the bill even stronger than it was. And we now have a compromise that I expect all 50 Democrats to agree with. Joe Manchin is working hard this week and next to find some Republicans to join in. He feels optimistic about it. I'm not sure that I share that optimism, but at some point we will have a confrontation on the filibuster rules in our Senate. And it may play out around voting rights. It may play out on some of the other issues that could be filibustered. And fasten your seatbelts. It's going to be an interesting battle. I will tell you that I support either repeal or reform of the filibuster because we got to get the job done. Got to get the job done. And I think there's several different paths that we could follow in terms of either reform or repeal that will get us over the hump with voting rights. Not as quickly as I'd like, but sometimes this is messy. But I do feel hopeful.
At the event with Senator Klobuchar, you had a few things to say about the Republican, I don't know if you want to call it an audit, investigation, review, going on here at the state level, and you were pretty fired up about it. What do you think the ongoing effects of that conversation continuing the way that it is will be on voter confidence, voter enthusiasm, just people's trust in the system?
John Delta charade? Is that?
I don't think we know who John Delta is yet.
I don't think we do either. I don't know how many saw the reporting and editorials that have been going on, but it is clear from even looking at the inquiries that are being made. So somebody named John Delta, or whose email address is John Delta, purporting to be former Justice Gableman, is asking the state elections board and county clerks to seize all of their, or protect all of their ballots and voting mechanisms. That is a clear sign of somebody who doesn't know how our elections work and are administered, because it's at the very local level. So let me just say a couple of things. The 2020 results are in. Election night revealed that Joe Biden had won by a narrow but comfortable margin to not make a recount automatic. The canvass confirmed what we knew after election night counts. And then the recount that the Trump campaign had to pay for, because it wasn't within that margin that it's automatic, confirmed that Biden won. And now there's this folly, and they're using taxpayer dollars. Trump had to use his campaign dollars to do the recount. I don't understand why, if this is purely partisan, that it's not either continues to be the Trump campaign who pays for it, or the Republican Party, but it should not be the taxpayers who are footing the bill for this charade. And frankly, I would call on Ron Johnson, I would call on Robin Voss, I would call on Mike Gallagher to put an end to the John Delta charade.
I think when all is said and done, there's got to be an action movie or something, right? The John Delta charade. I could, yeah. I'm going to take a couple of questions from the audience now. And since you just mentioned Ron Johnson, I think people have a lot of questions about Ron Johnson. But this one is, how do you stay respectful and collegial with your counterpart in the Senate?
So I'm my grandmother's granddaughter, right? So she raised me. She was a woman of incredible grace and politeness. I also grew up in Wisconsin, so it's Wisconsin nice. I think I can remember a couple of early lessons where I became quite, well, I'll give you a story of a colleague of mine in the state legislature who on one day cast a vote that I took really personally. It was a procedural vote, so he didn't have to, he could have stuck with the party, but didn't. And I was going to give him a piece of my mind. And somebody intervened. I had the discussion. Well, the very next day, he cast a vote and took an action that I viewed as heroic. And I was so glad that something had intervened. But there's lots of ways to approach this job. I've never felt that burning bridges is a good way to approach this job. And so, yes, I figure out what we can work on and forge ahead. But I do think it is important, sort of recognizing maybe the premise of the question, reading between the lines, that we do speak out when there's mistruth, that we do speak out. Leadership requires that one not, further the big lie. Leadership requires that one not engage in conspiracy theories about whether it's about the pandemic or elections or election interference, and we do want real leaders.
Seems to be a good setup for this question. Where were you on January 6th, and how dangerous do you think that event was to long-term democracy?
I was, well, we were doing the, receiving the electoral college votes from the states, and there was the first objection, so the Senate convened with Mike Pence in the chair, and I walked in just as the debate was beginning. I will remember, the details stand out on a day like that. I was walking over, and I could kind of hear the crowd beginning to filter over from the White House. And I said, before I walked into the chamber, I want to take a picture. And so I said, oh, the best view is from Chuck Schumer's office. So I went over there and went out the window, or looked out the window and sort of took a picture of the folks streaming towards the Capitol, but still at some distance. And then I went into the chamber and listened to the debate. So this was the objection around Arizona's results. And so listening to that back and forth, and then watched Vice President Pence get snatched from the presiding chair by his security detail. He was replaced with Chuck Grassley, who was President pro tem, based on his seniority. And then immediately, he's in the chain to be president. So he was immediately snatched out of the chair right after he was placed there, and then they just went into recess. And we were told that the safest place was to shelter in place, and they started closing all the doors to the chamber. And then after the breach of the Capitol and the breach of the House floor, they kind of reconsidered and said, no, it'll be safer if we can get you out before the crowd starts coming the other direction. And I never at the moment felt how close it was. And it was only during I think the impeachment trial, when I was seeing some of the footage of our being escorted to a building off-site, outside of the Capitol, of the fact that the crowd was just moments away, or some of the crowd. And so it was quite shocking, but we were watching some of what was happening in real time on a television monitor in the room that most of us were being sequestered, if you will. Mm-hmm. And that was shocking. It was also, a room occupied by those who were sort of rooting on some of this, as well as those who were shocked by it. And I realized how close we came.
Do you think we risk, I guess, the more time goes by, kind of minimizing how serious that really was?
Well, I do think that the inquiry that is being done right now on the House side, that, by the way, could have been completely non or bipartisan, but that was thwarted by the minority, I think, under the influence of Trump. I think that we will ultimately get a lot more information on how serious and how connected to both the previous administration and possibly some members of our own Congress it was, but that remains to be seen. But I don't think this is one that should ever be swept under the rug. And when you hear the rhetorical efforts to do that, saying, recasting it as generally a peaceful group, your eyes tell you otherwise, and we can't let those images and that truth be swept away.
Well, there's no real easy way to pivot to anything else from that topic, so I'm just going to go with another question from the audience, which I appreciate, and maybe we'll expand on a little bit. And the question is, what are you doing to appeal to rural Wisconsinites? Is there a way to make your work more apparent to them? And I would expand that to not just rural Wisconsinites, but folks in any part of the state that isn't necessarily as politically plugged in as Madison would be.
So I would say that that recognizing how tough things are, and showing up, listening, being respectful, as we were just talking about, and problem solving, and sort of talking about the issues people face without so much a partisan tint to it. So I'll give you an example that's been very exciting recently. With Democrats now in the majority, although razor thin, my leadership on various committees has increased, and so I now chair the Appropriations Subcommittee on Agriculture, Rural Development, and the Food and Drug Administration, which is terrific. We have been, as somebody who represents America's Dairyland, have been very focused on the fact that we've lost so many farms, especially our small family farms that have been, generational enterprises. But whether it's because of climate change and flooding events and bad weather, low prices for milk because of consolidation, or trade wars with China from the previous administration that impacted dairy quite a bit. All of the retaliatory tariffs were particularly harmful. Recognizing that and problem solving together, and that gains, I think, respect. And I was hosted on a farm the other day. There was somebody who, everyone told me he's a big Republican, but he was thrilled to have you and be able to boast about his contour crops, that help prevent erosion in southwestern Wisconsin in that area with challenging topography. I think you're going to have Catherine Kramer later. I don't know if she's listening right now, but in her studies of, say, rural-urban divide, she talks about how important it is really to show up. That, show up, listen, be respectful. You don't have to agree on everything, but that's sort of part of what makes a difference. I was referencing the timber stop that I had, meeting with folks that manage our forests in northern Wisconsin, and it's been a big struggle for them, and they're not known as being a liberal group, but I think, again, grateful when one of their senators shows up to recognize the struggles, the challenges, as well as the opportunities that they face.
Unsurprisingly, we've gotten a few questions about some positions you've taken that don't sit super well with some of your base here in Madison. One of them being stationing the F-35s at Truax, the other being the delisting of the gray wolf. Can you talk a little bit about each of those individually, but also just how you come to decisions on issues where it's maybe not going to be what your sort of most loyal base wants?
Yeah. Well, so on the F-35, the Guard Wing, the 115th, right now they fly F-16s. those are reaching the end of their lives, if you will. And the Air Force decided that they were going to base at least some of the next generation aircraft at Air National Guard bases as opposed to just at Air Force bases. And I certainly support Air Guard and Army Guard because they're civilians and they're in our communities, and it's very, very different model. And in any event, our Guard base competed for the F-35s with, I think, 5 other bases and won that competition. And after additional reviews, were awarded the F-35s by the then Secretary of the Air Force. And so what's important to me in this is to certainly listen to the concerns about what basing a new aircraft means. I think the most significant concern that I've heard is noise, and I've been fighting very hard to create or to obtain the resources that we need for noise mitigation. I've been following closely and working with my colleague, Senator Leahy in Vermont, where Burlington, Vermont also is home base now to F-35s, on working with the community on noise mitigation. Another issue that was raised was PFAS contamination. And we know, in fact, I was in Rhinelander during the break because they have a PFAS contamination situation right by their small airport. And what is it we need to do in terms of research, et cetera, to be able to understand the harm it causes, but also mitigate and get it out of our water supply. The good news about Dane County Regional Airport is some of the construction that will be required to update for the new basing will allow them to do some physical remediation of PFAS that's present now. And we all obviously have to move forward and deal with those forever chemicals in a more comprehensive way, including getting rid of those firefighting foams that they use at airports and in the Defense Department. On the wolves, here's my view. I cherish the Endangered Species Act as a way to be able to respond when we do have wildlife that is endangered, to protect it. And the wolves were listed at a time when I think there were numbered in the dozens, like 40 or so wolves still in Wisconsin. And at the time, the belief was that a healthy pack or number of packs in the state would, in aggregate number, a little over 100, and that would be allow delisting. And we worked really hard to conserve some of the habitat needed for them to restore to numbers that were appropriate for the state. We now have, I think the latest census suggests about 1,000 wolves in Wisconsin. The delisting has been litigated back and forth and back and forth. And, right now, the courts have said they can be delisted. And the Department of Natural Resources, I think using sound science, put out a management plan. And I read, sort of to my horror, that the Natural Resources Board it seems without any scientific backing, doubled the number. And I don't think that's appropriate, and I have, criticized that. But the one other thing I would add to that is I recognize that wolves are sacred to our tribal nations, and I do not believe that there is currently adequate consultation, which I believe is required by tribal sovereignty, regarding the either the Endangered Species Act to begin with or the management plans that are, and I think that DNR is getting better about that, but I do think that tribal consultation should be a key part of this, and we should respect the sovereignty of those tribes.
Another audience question. Do you think the recent Supreme Court ruling on Texas's abortion law will ultimately result in a reversal of Roe versus Wade? And I guess I'd add to that, how important do you think that issue will be in the elections in 2022?
Yeah, I can't hazard a guess on, I mean, obviously, the Texas law was designed in a way to make it, first of all, difficult to litigate with the state as the respondent, right? It's something that creates vigilantes out there that get bounties, I guess, for reporting the Uber driver, whoever. And so I think that the future of that law specifically is, I don't know how something like that stands. If it does, it's a permission slip for every other state to, that doesn't have, it would be really bad news. Here's what I'm doing, and the House has just recently taken it up, but I've introduced for a number of years with my colleague, Senator Blumenthal, something called the Women's Protection Act, that it basically says if this is not something that protects a woman's health or life, if it burdens a woman's reproductive freedom, then it's not valid. And so its aim is to get rid of all these laws that have been introduced across the country. I mean, hundreds and hundreds of bills that say the corridor width in a clinic that provides any abortions has to be a certain width, that physicians have to have hospital privileges, even though there's no science backing that up. And if you keep on promulgating these laws that do not further the health or life of the mother, then those should be considered by the court invalid. And I think that's the approach that we ultimately need to take. It's kind of like the voting rights law. If you're the way that was supposed to work before the Supreme Court limited it so extensively. That's the approach I'd like to see us take in protecting a woman's right to choose.
So we've talked about a lot of heavy stuff today. Do you want to talk about some fun stuff?
Sure.
Okay. Let's do that then. What's your favorite Wisconsin beer?
Right now, I would say, I mean, there's so many good choices, but I like Moon Man.
Oh, yeah, New Glarus.
Yeah.
It's a good one for this time of year.
Yeah.
Do you drink old fashions? And if so, what's your order?
Well, very rarely, but if I go to a supper club, it's a must, right? You can't go to a supper club without. So, yeah, brandy, I mean, Wisconsin style.
Sweet, sour, press?
Brandy and sweet.
Got it. If you're, like, you've got a colleague coming to do a campaign visit or something, they're not used to Wisconsin. I mean, I know you took Tim Kaine to the Old Fashioned back in the 2016
And we had
campaign.
an Old Fashioned.
And you had Old Fashions and cheese curds, I think, because he didn't know what a cheese curd was, which was mind-boggling.
Yeah, it boggles the mind.
Is that kind of like, what would be the thing that you'd want to take someone out for, to be like, okay, this is what
Well,
we do here?
certainly cheese curd. And I have to say, as much as the deep fried stuff is so popular and so tasty, I think one of the quintessential Wisconsin experiences is to have it so fresh that it squeaks.
Yes.
And so that's kind of my preferred, maybe bring them to the farmer's market and get some fresh off the farm.
I think about this a lot, probably more than I should, but our cheese experiences in Wisconsin, I feel like they're very much about the like actual texture and the experience, because when it's fresh, it squeaks, and then when it's like super aged, it's got the little crunchy crystals, and there's a lot of good cheese things to experience here.
There are.
What is the best advice that you've received in your life?
In my life? Gosh.
Well, that's something that stands out to you.
Well, in the digital age, I would say never read the comments.
Yes. That's wise.
And I now deliver that advice to anyone thinking about, entering public life in any way. Don't read the comments, please. Have somebody on your, somebody who has your back read them. Make sure that nothing too bad is out there. But yeah, it's just depressing.
True. What are among some of the proudest accomplishments of your time in the Senate thus far?
Oh, goodness. So I would say, I'm going to start with the House, because I was there when I came to public life because I care about, many issues, but healthcare. I want to see a system where everyone's covered and everyone can afford it and it's high quality, and we're not there. But I was there in the House when we took a step, the Affordable Care Act. And my amendment in the committee, Energy and Commerce Committee, was to make sure that all young people were covered on their parents' health insurance until they were 26. And when that passed, and the Affordable Care Act was implemented, 20 million people who didn't have health insurance before, including many young people, got covered. And and I will tell you, the sausage making of legislation. We ended up passing my amendment and the bill at some god awful hour, like 2 a.m. The chairman had the votes, and he wasn't going to let anyone give speeches or whatever. It's like, we got the votes, we're going to do it right now. So it was really anticlimactic, and I'd worked so hard on that measure. But then, like years later, I'd just go to, like a campus like this one, and I'd be in a room full of undergrads, and I'd say, raise your hand if you're on your parents' insurance. And everyone's hand went up, and it choked me up to see, like, this is the impact. Something that in the moment was anticlimactic is so consequential. So now I think of building on that and working on, if we're able to close the Medicaid gap in the Build Back Better budget, again, that's a lot of people who will have comprehensive access to affordable quality health care. And if we're able to get, I hope we can, Medicare to be able to bargain with the pharmaceutical companies and really lower prices, that will make a huge difference. And one of the things, so those are things I'm working on, but one of the things I am also proud of in the Senate, since you asked specifically, is some big reforms in the VA healthcare system, including how they treat veterans with PTSD and chronic pain, and sort of pivoting from let's just prescribe opioids and narcotics. Too many people were getting addicted and overdosing, to let us empower the person to have all sorts of modalities. Who thought that the VA would be doing acupuncture and chiropractic, and well, they've been doing that for a long time, but acupuncture, massage, aromatherapy. And I remember when I was at one of the facilities, I said, aromatherapy? I mean, even I wasn't sold on that. And they said, this guy that they've been working with has flashbacks whenever he smells diesel fuel. And all of a sudden, aromatherapy made sense to me. Like, yeah, that sense of smell can often be a trigger for pain of sorts. So, yeah, I'm glad that they are doing that, and I really am, a big reason for that transformation, working with constituents in the state.
Yeah. I know that downtime isn't really a thing that exists for elected officials, but if you have any, what do you like to do?
So all my hobbies involve making things where I can see the results pretty quickly. So I do everything. So my grandmother, I said, was the head costume designer. So she taught me to sew from, like I could probably walk about the same time I learned how to sew, right? I've learned them both at the same time. So I do some sewing projects. Though I have to say with the time, more of them are, alterations than creating new garments, but I do sometimes do that.
Oh, really?
Did a lot of masks in the early part. This isn't one of them, the one that keeps slipping off my nose, but yeah, did a lot of fun masks at the beginning of the pandemic, and some, little cabinetry, carpentry type things, that sort of stuff.
Yeah.
And I like those because I can see the results in my day job. Doesn't always operate as quickly.
So a friend of mine interviewed you a few years back for the New York Times Magazine, and I remember she had a really hard time finding out like little fun details about your life because there wasn't a lot out there. But one of the things I did take away from that is you said you like to cook.
Yeah.
Do you have any favorite go-to recipes or dishes that you like to, or do you use recipes, or are you just kind of going off the cuff?
I do use recipes. Sort of compulsively. People laugh at me like, you've made this 100 times. Don't you remember it? And I don't know. So, I mean, it really varies. I get different food, right? Seasonally, et cetera. But I would say, coming into the fall, I like a lot of different soups. I have a ginger curry carrot soup that I really love. Fall comes and I'll make it a whole bunch of times. I have a real taste for hot and sour soup, and also, if you sort of go in the Thai direction, tom yum soup. And while I like it from the restaurants, I also like trying to replicate that. In the spring, I make a really mean ceviche, which I like. And let's see, what else? Well, in the summer and early fall, I like to use herbs and vegetables from my garden. So I still have a couple more tomatoes that are going to ripen before all is said and done, and lots of basil, lots of pesto.
I became a fan of cooking because it's also one of the things where you actually have to put your phone down and you can't be interrupted. Like your hands are messy, you can't deal with anything else. You just have to do that.
It's true, although I often do Google my recipes.
Sure, yeah.
So, you asked if I use a recipe or not. I often will, I have leftover X, Y, and Z that are all perishable. What's a good recipe that will use all of that up before I have to fly to DC and have it all go bad, right? Or vice versa. So I'm often using the iPad or the phone for my recipe.
Sure. Are you currently reading anything, watching anything, anything to kind of take your mind off of things?
Yeah, boy, I am reading, or just finished a couple things, have a couple things lined up. My colleagues have been really prolific in their memoirs these days. So I just finished Tammy Duckworth's memoir, and am just about to finish Maisie Hirono's memoir. Those are kind of interesting to get to know your colleagues who are like dear friends, and you didn't even know about this big part of their life or their background, and it's quite, and it's, I've got to do it sometime too. I don't know where I'd find the time, but I do feel like that's something that I'd like to do at some point. So that's the nonfiction side. Just finished, I don't know what moved me to take this up. Well, a couple of things. I wanted to revisit some classics during the pandemic. So I read Moby Dick.
Wow.
And Song of Solomon, which was really interesting to experience. But I'm sort of queuing up some more. I do some audiobooks when I'm going to be in the car for a while, too.
So
It's a big state. I put about well over 2,000 miles on the vehicle during the recess.
That was my next question. When you're driving or you're flying, do you listen to music, books, podcasts, all of the above?
Mostly books, if I'm listening to stuff. On the planes, I'm more likely to be reading paper.
Mm-hmm. Do you recall what your first concert was?
Oh, yes. REO Speedwagon at the Coliseum here. Back when they had festival seating, is that still a thing where you don't have the band's up there and you just sort of crowd in where you want on the floor?
I've honestly never seen a show at the Coliseum.
Yeah, I feel like I'm not reading the crowd well. REO Speedwagon fans, anyone went to it? Somebody about my age knowing? My second was Queen.
Oh, man.
Yeah, also at the Dane County
Good.
Memorial Coliseum.
What was your favorite concert that you've been to?
Favorite? Probably James Taylor.
Solid. What's your favorite vacation destination in Wisconsin?
Madeline Island. It's a little island in Lake Superior among the Apostle Islands, for those who don't know. You take a car ferry from Bayfield, Wisconsin. It takes you about 20 minutes to get there. And then if you go in the summer, there's lots of people there for a small island. If you go in the winter, there's about 350 year-round residents. So pretty cool place.
I've actually never been, but
Well.
I'm going to put it on the list now. And speaking of lists, if you had a Wisconsin bucket list, so like things that you think are really stereotypically Wisconsin, are there any things that you haven't gotten to that you think you'd maybe like to try someday?
That's a great question. I'm sure the answer is yes.
I mean, there's plenty of things to try.
I often go to places and I say, I've got to come back when I'm not working, when I'm not there for a meeting or whatever, because it looks so fun. I think I should do a middle-aged adult day in the Dells or something. I mean, I haven't done that since I was a little kid.
Yeah,
right?
it'd be a totally different experience.
Should I go to a water park and then...
Why not? Okay, this is the last question, and it's very important. What's your favorite Wisconsin cheese?
Oh, so hard to choose.
You can name a few.
Okay, so Maubais. All right. And then, so I've been to so many creameries that
Is that Carvalli, I think?
No,
What's
it's, maybe it is. I want to say it's a different one.
Anyway.
But I've been to so many creameries and cheesemakers that, you like go and it's so exciting that then you like their cheese. So in Thorpe, Wisconsin, there's a woman named Marika who makes Gouda. She's actually an immigrant from Holland, and she uses an authentic, and you can get it down here too. So just look for Marika's Gouda. And I think the favorite one is, it has a great spice in it. It's not
The fenugreek?
Yes.
I love that
fenugreek. Everyone does. That's like the number one. So I'd highly recommend that. And of course, cheese curds. I mean,
Yeah, can't go wrong.
can't go wrong there.
Well, thank you for answering questions, serious and a little lighter, and thank you all for being here.
Thank you.
We would like to take another moment to thank our sponsors, whose financial support helps make Cap Times Idea Fest the important event that it is. Special thanks to our presenting sponsor, UBS, the Burrish Group. They have been a major sponsor since the very first Idea Fest. Major sponsors include HealthX Ventures, Exact Sciences, and Quartz. Co-sponsors are Madison Gas and Electric, Godfrey and Kahn Law, the University of Wisconsin-Madison, and EPIC. Our Friends of Idea Fest sponsors are Wisconsin Alumni Research Foundation, Madison Community Foundation, University Research Park, Cargo Coffee, Doc Smokehouse, and Forward Theater Company. Our media partners are the Wisconsin State Journal, Madison.com, WKOW Channel 27, and Hinckley Productions. Again, we thank you for your support and for making Idea Fest 2021 a huge success.